She built the first mound with a garden trowel and a coffee can, and it took her the better part of a morning. By the time she finished, she had a low curving ridge of packed earth about knee-high and maybe 40 feet long, running crossways to the slope of the west field on her family's place in Cimarron County, out in the far tip of the Oklahoma Panhandle. Then she started on a second one, 20 feet upslope of the first, curving the same way. Then a third. Her name was Junie Halverson, and she was 11 years old, and when her father saw the mounds from the tractor, he assumed she was playing. Building forts, making roads for something, the kind of thing a child does with a whole summer and a field to herself. He was not unkind about it. He just did not think about it. Nobody did. A girl of 11 moving dirt around the low end of a field that was not being farmed that year was not a thing that required anybody's attention, and so she did not get any. That was the strange mercy of it, and Junie understood it even then. Nobody watched her because nobody expected anything from her. Her older brothers got watched. Her brothers got corrected and instructed and argued with. Junie got left alone, and being left alone was exactly what the work required, because if any grown man in Cimarron County had understood what she was actually building, he would have told her to stop. She was not making forts. She was drawing lines across the path of the wind, and she was doing it from memory, from something she had found and had never been able to ask about, because the only person who could have explained it to her was already gone. 2 years later, when the wind came up out of the southwest and stripped the topsoil off half the farms in that end of the Panhandle and turned the sky the color of an old bruise, the low west field with the curving earth mounds across it was going to be the one piece of ground for miles that stayed exactly where it was. If stories about forgotten skills, quiet determination, and the wisdom that outlasts the people who carry it mean something to you, subscribe and join our farming family. And tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. We would love to know how far this story has traveled. Cimarron County is the last county in the Oklahoma Panhandle, the far western tip, and it sits at the dead center of what people once called the Dust Bowl. That is not a figure of speech out there. It is soil. The land is flat and open and dry, high plains, short grass country, and the wind crosses it with nothing to slow it down for 100 miles in any direction. When the rains fail, and out there the rains fail often, the ground gives up its topsoil to that wind. And in the 1930s it gave up so much of it, so violently, that the sky went black at noon, and the dirt drifted like snow against the fences and buried the farms. People left. Whole families walked away from that county and did not come back. The ones who stayed learned things, hard, in the worst way there is to learn them, and some of what they learned got written down and some of it got passed along, and a great deal of it simply died with the people who knew it. The Halversons had stayed, 4 generations on the same section, dryland wheat mostly, some cattle, holding on through the dry years the way everybody out there held on, which was barely. Junie was the youngest of 4 and the only girl. Her father, Sten Halverson, was a decent tired man with 2 older sons to raise into the operation, and not much attention left over. Her mother ran the house and the books, and in a back bedroom of that farmhouse, for the first 11 years of Junie's life, lived her great-grandmother, Alma, who was 91 years old, and who had been a grown woman with children of her own. When the dusk came, Alma Halverson was the one who paid attention to Junie. The 2 of them, the oldest and the youngest, spent whole afternoons together while the rest of the family worked, and Alma, whose mind wandered further back every year, told the girl things, told her about the dust, told her what her own husband had done in 1936 to save a field when everybody else was losing theirs. Junie was 10 when Alma died, and she had not understood yet that the old woman had been handing her something. The thing Alma left was not words in the end. It was an object, and Junie found it after the funeral, going through a cigar box of the old woman's keepsakes that nobody else wanted. It was a photograph, cracked and brown, and on the back of it, in a hand Junie did not recognize, was written a date, 1937, and a word, listing. The photograph showed a field, an ordinary field, except that across it ran a series of low curving ridges, evenly spaced, and standing beside them was a man Junie knew from other pictures to be Alma's husband, her own great-great-grandfather, dead 50 years before she was born. She had heard Alma, in the last year, murmur about the mounds, about how her husband had thrown up the ground to catch the wind. Junie had thought it was the wandering of an old mind. Now she had a picture of it and a word, and nobody left alive who could tell her what either one meant. Here is what the girl pieced together, slowly, over a winter, and here is why it worked. Wind does not strip a field evenly. It moves the soil by rolling and bouncing the heavier grains along the surface. And those moving grains knock loose others, which knock loose others so that a bare flat field in a high wind does not lose its topsoil gently. It loses it in a chain reaction that builds as the wind crosses more open ground. The longer the unbroken stretch the wind gets to run, the more soil it picks up and the harder it hits, so the far end of a long bare field erodes far worse than the near end. The whole trick of protecting that soil is to never let the wind get a long run at it. That is what the mounds did. A ridge of packed earth thrown up crossways to the wind does two things at once. It gives the wind something solid to climb, breaking its force at ground level where the damage is done, and just as important, it interrupts that chain reaction. The soil grains bouncing along the surface hit the upwind face of the ridge and stop. They pile up against it instead of being carried on to knock loose the next stretch of field. Space a series of these ridges across a slope, each one close enough that the wind never gets a clean run between them, and you have broken a field 100 miles of open country, long into a series of short protected stretches, none of them long enough for the wind to build its full strength. The old-timers had a name for a version of this. They called it listing, throwing up ridges with a lister plow, and in the dust years, it was one of the emergency practices that sometimes saved a field, and sometimes did not, depending on whether the man doing it understood the spacing and the angle, or was just desperately turning dirt. Alma's husband had understood it. The photograph was proof he had done it and his field had survived, and an 11-year-old girl with a trowel was now trying to reproduce, by hand, from a cracked photograph and a single written word, something a grown man had done with a team and a plow 70 years before. It went wrong more than it went right. Her first mounds, the ones she built that first morning, washed half away in a thunderstorm, before she understood she had to pack the earth, not just pile it, and crown the top so water shed off instead of soaking in and slumping the whole ridge. Her spacing was wrong the first summer. She built the ridges too far apart, guessing, and she had no way to test it and no one to ask, and she spent a whole season on mounds that she would later understand left too much open ground between them for the wind to gather speed. And she nearly quit in the middle because it was slow, brutal, invisible work, moving a field's worth of dirt by hand, and there was no reward in it and no one watching and no sign it would ever matter. She was 11 and then 12, building earthworks for a disaster that might never come, alone, with a trowel, while her brothers learned to drive the combine and got praised for it. She kept going for a reason she could not have defended to anybody. The old woman had wanted her to know this. That was all she had. It was enough. There was a stretch that winter when she took the photograph out almost every evening and studied it by the lamp. The spacing of the ridges in it, the angle they made against the far fence, the way the man stood beside them as if he were proud of something a stranger would have called a plowed-up mess. She could not ask him anything. She could not ask Alma anything. She had a brown cracked picture and a word she had to look up in a farming book at the school library. And even the book was thin on it. A paragraph, a practice from another era that modern farming had left behind. She built her understanding the way she built the mounds. Slowly, by hand, out of almost nothing. By the second summer she had corrected the spacing, working it out by watching how blown dust and dry snow drifted and settled against the ridges she already had, letting the wind itself teach her where the next ridge needed to be. She built 14 of them across the low west field, curving, evenly set, packed hard and crowned. And then she waited, though she did not know she was waiting for anything in particular. The wind came in the 3rd week of April, 2 years after she built the first mound. It came the way the bad ones come out there, a hot, hard wind out of the southwest that did not let up, that built through the morning and kept building, until by midday the air was full of moving dirt, and the sky to the southwest was a brown wall a mile high, rolling toward the county like something solid. It blew for 2 days. Farms all across that end of the panhandle lost their topsoil. Fields that had been worked bare and smooth, the way modern equipment likes them, gave up their soil to that wind in exactly the chain reaction Junie had come to understand. The erosion building across every long open stretch until the far ends of the big fields were scoured down past the good dirt into the pale hardpan below. The drifts piled against the fence lines, dark and fine, feet deep in places, soil that had taken 10,000 years to build, blown off in 2 days. The Marchetti place east of the Halversons lost the whole surface off a quarter section. The county road filled with drifted dirt and closed. It was, the old-timers said, the worst blow since the 50s, and a few of the very oldest said quietly that it was the worst since the 30s, since the days nobody wanted to name. And the low west field on the Halverson place, the one with 14 curving earth mounds thrown across it by a girl with a trowel, held its ground. Not perfectly. The mounds themselves took a beating, their upwind faces scoured, dark drifts of caught soil piled deep against every one of them. But that was the whole point. The soil piled against the ridges was soil that had not blown away. It had moved a few feet and stopped, caught, held, instead of joining the brown wall and leaving the county forever. Between the ridges where the wind had never been allowed a clean run, the field surface was intact. The topsoil was still there. It was the one field in view from that road that the wind had crossed and failed to carry off. Sten Halverson walked that field after the wind died, in the strange yellow quiet that comes after a big blow, and he understood it. He was a farmer. He did not need it explained. He looked at the caught drifts against the ridges and the intact ground between them, and he understood exactly what his daughter had built, and exactly what it had done, and he understood, too, that he had watched her build it for 2 years, and had never once asked her what it was. He found her at the edge of the field. He did not make a speech. He asked her where she had learned it. She told him about the cigar box and the photograph, and the word on the back of it, and about Alma murmuring in the last year about the mounds her husband threw up to catch the wind. Stan Halverson stood there a long moment. Then he said that his own grandfather had done that, in the bad years, and that he had heard about it his whole life, and had never once thought to do it himself, and had never known there was a picture. That should be the moment the county changed. It is not quite what happened, because a single field surviving one storm does not convince a whole county to move dirt by hand, and there was no easy way to do it with modern equipment set up for smooth fields and big passes, and the rains came halfway decent the next 2 years. And memory is short even in a county built on the longest and worst memory in America. A few neighbors asked about it. 1 or 2 tried a version. Most did not. The practice that had saved the Westfield went back to being a thing an old man's grandfather used to do. A story, a photograph in a box. It worked once, provably, in front of everyone, and it very nearly was not repeated at all. What kept it alive was Junie. She did not let it go. She grew up on that section, and she took it over, and she built her ridges before every dry spring for the rest of her working life, refining the spacing across 40 years until she could set them by eye. And when the big winds came, and out there they always eventually come, her ground stayed and her neighbor's ground blew, over and over, until a few of the stubborn ones finally could not argue with it and did it too. She kept the photograph. She never found out the name of the man who wrote listing on the back of it. She only knew it was not her great-great-grandfather's hand, and so it was probably Alma's, written young, about her own husband, and kept for 70 years in a cigar box for no reason anyone could name, except that some things are too important to throw away, even when you can no longer say why. The Westfield is still there. It is still gently ribbed, crossways to the southwest wind. The ridge is lower now and softened by grass, and the topsoil between them is deep and dark and old. The oldest soil for miles, because it is the only soil for miles that was never allowed to leave. The wind still crosses it every spring. It still cannot take it. Did someone in your family leave you something you only understood later? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one, and if this story meant something to you, subscribe, and let us know where you are watching from tonight.